Welcome to Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. My name is Mariana Cordier, and I am your host. I am coming to you via Zoom from my home. The holidays are coming, and we all need to be aware and take precautions in our new normal. Every year, accidents occur as a result of fire and electricity, and we all need to remember the safety tips to ensure we have a great holiday season without any incidents or accidents. The holidays are also the time of the holiday blues. This year, the additional stress of the pandemic, financial constraints, and managing expectations can stress all of us, adults and kids. Today, we will discuss how to cope. My first guest is Alan Sachter. He is the University of Maryland at College Park Fire Marshal, and he will share the importance of safety. My second guest is Erin McClure. She is the Director of Operations and Diversity Officer for the School of Public Health, also at the University of Maryland. And this is a University of Maryland show because our third guest is Mia Smith Bynum. She's a psychologist and also an associate professor in family sciences. Welcome all of you to the show. Thank you so much for coming on, because I know it's early to really think about and talk about the holidays, but boy, this year is going to be tough. So I figure we'll start with Alan first. Thank you for being on the show.
Sure, Al, thanks for having me on the show. The holidays present some, fire safety issues that I think everybody should be thinking about. Probably the most, they're all important, but I think the first thing that people think of at the holidays, of course, is a Christmas tree. We kind of encourage people to get artificial trees if they can. But if they want to get freshly cut trees, you can do that if you want, but you really need to keep them very well watered. So at the first sign of any needles falling off a Christmas tree or it's drying out, you really want to get that tree out of the house. I know some people may be familiar with the large fire they had in Annapolis a number of years ago. And that was really caused by, the electrical lights that were around the tree and the fact that the tree was it had been there for quite a while. So it was getting very dry.
Well, that's the main thing we always think about is the Christmas trees or the holiday bushes, as they call them. But, I noticed that also people are lighting more and having them lit for more extended time candles.
Yeah.
And, that always scares me a little bit.
Yeah. Candles, a lot of it is common sense. You want to keep candles away from combustibles. You want to use sturdy holders so that they don't get knocked over, by the cat jumping up on the table or the dog wagging its tail. And of course, during this holiday season, people use menorahs. All right. So when you use your menorah, you want to make sure that it's tended. And, you want to make sure that it's a non-combustible menorah. And I say that just because here at the university, we've had fires where people have tried to improvise by using a foam egg container as menorah. Okay, it's pretty good use of materials instead of throwing them out, but not very good for fire safety. So it's just common sense, be careful, make sure they don't fall over and keep them away from combustibles.
What about things?
Don't leave them unattended. Don't go to bed with your candles on either.
Well, that's a good tip. Sometimes I have to admit I have left a candle. But let me ask you about the cooking for Thanksgiving, because I know we kind of jumped right on to Christmas, but I do know that sometimes my cooking skills leave much to be desired. I've caught things on fire. So any tips for those amateur cooks out there?
Well, again, you want to make sure you don't leave anything unattended. You're not, especially on the stove. If you have to do that, then get some sort of timer, and also keep a cooking mitt or something available so that if you have to grab something hot, you can just grab it and take it off the stove. The other big thing that comes up at the holidays with cooking that really has caused some serious fires is the frying turkeys. And I know why people do that, because they're very delicious. It's got to be my favorite way to do it. But when you're going to use a fryer to cook turkey, make sure it's outside, away from the house, and absolutely make sure that the turkey is not frozen. It has to be thoroughly thawed, and make sure that the oil is not above what the manufacturer says it should be, because that just leads to disasters.
Okay. And then I have a quick question. I know I've seen pop up in a bunch of my neighbors' backyards are the propane heaters or electric heaters for the outdoors so that they can, socialize, but outside instead of inside because of COVID and stuff. Anything that you need to be concerned about or know when you have those things on your decks?
Well, it's good that you're seeing them outside, because they should definitely be outside. They really shouldn't be on a porch or under a tent or even really on a deck. If they're propane, you want to make sure that your propane fittings are tight, and people can test that themselves with a little soapy water around the connections. Because it's not just a source of fire. If it was to be inside, it's also a source of carbon monoxide. So again, these are open flames. You want to keep them away from combustibles as well.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask Aaron, I know that you guys are having a program at the University of Maryland for happiness and wellness. I love the title. Tell me something about that.
Thanks so much. Our dean will love that you love that title as well. He's very excited about this initiative, and it really incorporates the 8 dimensions of wellness. And our vision in this school and with this initiative is to promote happiness and well-being for all, and align with our University of Maryland School of Public Health vision of physical, mental, and social health and well-being. It's at our local level. It extends, to our global interactions that we have as a school too. So hopefully at the end of this, you'll be able to share a few little links and stuff maybe that roll on the screen. And if so,
absolutely. And we also will have it on our YouTube channel where folks in the audience, I remind you, you can go and check it out and it'll be available.
Great. So for us as a School of Public Health and the public health profession, and also as a land grant institution at the University of Maryland, we have a deep commitment to doing good and doing work that benefits our community. And that's at the local, state, and even goes more broadly than that. But with this and with our initiative, we really want to be sure to emphasize positive care, self-care, and a strengths-based approach for everyone. And really,
what does that mean for those of us who are not so aware of what you mean? Like, what's an example?
So I would rather focus on some opportunities where we can get folks engaged instead of things that they're not doing. So if they're looking to or seeking opportunity to have engagement in a wellness activity or incorporate some of the tips that we have, it's around meeting people where they are. So having an awareness of where you are at that moment and awareness of who you are and what you're looking to do. So asking yourself questions like, what do I need right now? What can I use that will help me feel happy? What can I incorporate that will make me feel well? And starting from that instead of from a deficit of, I haven't been doing that great lately in terms of exercising, or, putting the negative spin on it, and instead focusing on incorporating the tools that we have and the people that are around us that can help support us in that. And
well,
sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great. Well, and I was going to ask Mia to join us in this conversation because it seems to me that this is a time where everyone is stressed. I don't know about you guys, but I'm stressed. And I have some flexibility for folks who don't have any flexibility, or they face, concerns about where they're going to live because of rent, or they lost their jobs, and, Christmas is coming around the corner, Thanksgiving, how am I going to pay for food? How am I forget about gifts and all that kind of stuff? That just has got to be overwhelming.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned at the top of the show with the holidays coming, daylight savings is over, so it's getting darker earlier. And so we're definitely in a different season of the pandemic in multiple ways, and sort of building on some of the suggestions that Aaron had mentioned Keeping a gratitude journal, I think it sounds a little bit hokey, but a lot of science backs that up, because when you're dealing with economic stress and the uncertainty, people are dealing with grief. And now we have the holidays coming for many of the various faith groups that are represented in our community. And so we're dealing with loss on a lot of levels. So you really do have to be intentional to focus on the positive, because there is a lot of negative in this new normal. But waking up every day or before you go to sleep at night, really trying to write down. I mean, there's something about the connections between the positive focus and the brain that helps to boost or maintain that positive mood. Those are one of the things that I would recommend. Acknowledging those days where you do feel down and giving yourself room for that sadness, for that grief, for that worry. And then the other thing that I would recommend, sort of 3 takeaways. If you or your family is dealing with a lot of stress right now, and it's on a level that you haven't foreseen because perhaps some of the things you're dealing with are, to go ahead and to begin to look for mental health care now. It's something that we typically put on a lower level of value in the way we think about health, but it typically takes about 2 to 6 weeks to actually even be seen by a therapist once you actually get on their caseload, because that's a typical turnaround. You call up your insurance company, or you call one of our clinics here in the area that serves the public, and it may be a few weeks before you can actually be seen. So don't wait, because as we get to the end of the year, that's likely going to be more of a challenge. And so acknowledging your grief, acknowledging that sadness, but then being intentional about focusing on the things that are doing well. And then if for the holidays with the changes, be intentional around making a plan. Will you travel? Will you not? If you do, think about ways you can modify your gatherings so that they're not quite as large. Everyone who's going to see each other should make a plan to get tested before they gather. And we know that there's different days in terms of the turnaround for results. And so all of that has got to be planned before one sees a loved one that they've not been in touch with because of the distance. And so
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and ask you, what about kids? Are kids being affected?
Oh, yes, for sure. So kids are dealing with multiple levels of loss. So the things that American kids are typically focused on over the course of a typical calendar year, our kids have lost that. So graduations, whether you're talking about kindergarten or college, all of those rituals are gone. A typical summer vacation and time off. The lack of structure around the Zoom learning, that we've made many improvements, but they are not a replacement for the in-class experience and the physical structure that school buildings represent for kids and families around the country. And so I'm just hearing generally in my personal and professional networks that people are just very, very stressed out. And so if you're wondering why are tempers shorter and fuses shorter, that's because people are under a lot more pressure. And so what I generally do with all of my colleagues when we're working on something, we start with a bit of sharing and we give each other grace. And we want to give that same grace to our kids and recognize that they don't have the life experience to understand how unprecedented this is, that they're figuring out who they are and they're growing up in the midst of these unprecedented times. And so more patience, and then really paying attention to kids for whom they're not behaving in the ways that we're accustomed to, kids who typically do fine or really great in school. If we see a drop off in grades, a lot of isolating in their rooms without really engaging. I would be checking in with siblings, because the things about families is if the parents don't know, the siblings always know what's going on with kids. And so being able to check in with them and to make sure that everyone is getting what they need. And then a easy question to ask is about sadness, guilt, or hopelessness in the past 2 weeks. And so if kids are endorsing that in any way, you want to get them to see a health provider right away.
And Erin, I wanted to ask you, the reason I really like the title of the initiative that Maryland has is because one of the things, I'm an attorney, that I do see is the result of self-medicating with alcohol and other substances and stuff like that. And I'm hoping that your initiative is giving people alternatives to that.
We try to focus on, as I mentioned, a variety of dimensions to connect with your wellness and having check-in points, as I mentioned, because when you're starting to notice that you're leaning on things more frequently that are less healthy behaviors, we want you to utilize resources that are there and community members that are there to help support you in making the healthier decisions. So targeting, making a plan about that earlier on before it gets further down the road where it becomes even more challenging is really critical there. But again, emphasizing that we are not trying to create shame or guilt or any of those type of feelings around any of these behaviors, that instead it's about accessing other healthy behaviors and the resources that can help you changing that pattern of behavior and getting support to do so.
So what are some of the tips? I know that Mia gave some great tips about identifying if our kids are struggling, but what are some of the tips about when we are struggling?
Right, when we're struggling. Well, a lot of our tips are about tapping into resources. So tapping into your own personal feelings and then using that to tap into resources. So we have tips from our counseling center. We also have a Center for Healthy Families that has a program called the Together program that also talks about aspects of financial dimensions of wellness and with the major stressor, as you mentioned, for folks, especially in these uncertain times. One of the tips we had recently even was around, just navigating getting your flu shot. And, the messaging that we receive based on our own identity and our cultural background is very different. And so making sure that we're having science-based information and having that information coming from trusted resources in our community and being able to talk about it, what it means to get that get the flu shot, or even talking about COVID and moving into when we finally have a vaccine that's available, to trust in that vaccine and the folks that are making that available. And so we want to make sure that you're being informed, that you're getting information from a science-based resource, and also that you're connecting to that information with folks that you do trust and are part of your own community as well.
So Mia, to flip the conversation to, an audience of adults watching this, because we are on YouTube, so I imagine we might get some younger people or kids. What would you say to, younger audience, teenagers perhaps, for them to deal and cope with the stress that they're having if they don't want to share it with their parents or?
I think there's a few different ways that young people, and I'm thinking sort of late high school, post high school age, that they're getting out of the house. So I think with the virtual learning and the peer group is so important for teenagers in particular and young adults, and that without that, that's a huge loss for them. But at the same time, you need to get out of the house and get some vitamin D. You need to get some sunlight on you. And so that's one of the big things that I see with teenagers right now. And I've actually heard of some kids just being afraid to go out because of the virus, putting that mask on, right? And getting some fresh air. That I think people will often underestimate how important it's going to be to keep doing that as we get closer to the end of the year. And then you labeling your emotions, like when you're feeling sad, to not stuff it down. So one of the things you all were talking about with the self-medicating is that people will often say, "Whew, I'm just wiped out," right? And you really got to drill down and get below what is the wiped out? I feel sad. I feel tired. I feel lonely. I feel whatever it is, getting to the root of that and acknowledging it. And then if that brings up some sadness, letting that sadness flow. And then perhaps picking up the phone and calling a friend and talking to them about it. Or better yet, setting up a Zoom call, right? Because the social interaction is what feeds us. We're social creatures by nature. And so not really taking that time and treating it as a cherished event, that it can sort of feel like, another Zoom on top of another Zoom on top of another Zoom. But as we get into it further, really making the time for that and doing things that you might not have done. Like my family, we did a virtual family reunion gathering late in the summer, and my family is all over the country, and so I think that that seems like so kind of cliche, but when you actually do it and you see family members who don't live in the part of the country where you are, particularly aged relatives who you might not have seen, if someone helps them log on, people were saying like, this is the most fun I've had since the pandemic has started. So I wouldn't underestimate that. And that's a really important thing to do during the Thanksgiving holiday too, as well, if you can't travel, and just have it on the kitchen counter in the background while everyone's celebrating. That's
Right.
one way to rethink this.
So that brings us back around to you, Alan, because I was thinking for a second here that that's going to increase definitely lots of people outside. And we've already talked about the propane and the electric heaters, but there's also fire pits and other things that, maybe the kids are around it, not the adults at any one time. What do you suggest for them to be safe in the outdoors, when it's getting colder and they're trying to keep warm?
Well, I mean, fire pits outside they are pretty popular. I mean, they've been getting more popular, and now for the reasons you said, people want to get outside, sit out there. Well, the most important thing is to make sure you check your regulations in the city or the county that you live in. I mean, most places, a fire pit can be about 3 feet in diameter, and it needs to have a mesh cover to keep the embers in it. And, keep it away from the house. And as you said, with children, obviously in any situation, you want to make sure the kids don't get too close to it. There's a lot of propane fire pits out there too. And it's the same thing with your grills. You want to make sure that the propane is properly attached. And again, you can check that with soapy water if you want to check connections. And make sure it's outside, most importantly. I wouldn't even use one underneath a tent or anything like that. So
And let me ask you, because there are going to be folks that are going to be struggling, and sometimes in the lower income housing, they use their ovens to heat their apartments. And that's very concerning because it's very dangerous. Can you explain to the audience why?
Well, ovens aren't intended for that purpose. And, you could have any kind of, combustibles that are near ovens. Or anything like that. And people, the heat tends to be in one place and people gather around them, and if it's a gas stove, I mean, the more you use it, the more chance there is for, a carbon monoxide issue or something like that. So it's just not a good idea. I know that some people also use space heaters, So they would use electric space heaters. What we like to say is space heaters need space. So you want to keep combustibles about 3 feet away. But electric
And when you say combustibles, you mean like also blankets and,
blankets, clothes, obviously anything like that, paper, whatever it is. But usually it's clothes that end up getting piled on top of heaters. The other types of heaters would be the kerosene heaters that people used. And, when I was growing up and I had some friends that, they needed to use kerosene heaters. And it always made me a little nervous with kerosene heaters. You want to make sure that a window's cracked or something, because you want to get plenty of ventilation in there, because that could be a CO problem as well. And you want to make sure you use kerosene. I mean, there's been situations where people would pour gasoline into them.
Wow, that's actually really scary. Well, and so that reminds me that, we did, the time did change. So usually I always remember the fire departments always say, remember to change the batteries on your fire alarm and your CO alarm, right?
Yeah. So, you want to make sure that your batteries have been replaced if you have battery smoke detectors. So now with the codes throughout Maryland, we're moving towards, sealed, 10-year sealed battery smoke detectors that you don't have to replace. But most people don't really know what they have in their house. So you always want to make sure that you test the smoke detector if it has a test button, and if it does have replaceable batteries, to replace the batteries.
All right. And then so, Aaron, where are places that the audience can go to get more information about the services and initiatives that you were talking about earlier?
So, well, our website, sph.umd.edu.
Oh my God, you did that too fast. Do it slow.
Sorry, sph.umd.edu. I apologize. And just a simple search for, if you do UMD, School of Public Health, or UMD SPH, we should come up. And putting anything in like happy and well, that'll pull it up as well. And so we have a lot of the resources on our website there. We have a historical listing of all the tips. We make them simple tips, usually one thing at a time. Each week we have about 3 tips. This week coming up, we have about 5. And the reason that we've done that is it's a special week. We're in a post-election space. We want to make sure that we touch on more of the dimensions of health and the multiple ways that we can support folks with positive self-care in this very uncertain time. Although we have an election that ended, we all know that there's a lot of questions and things that are happening around that, and a transition of leadership. And so we want to make sure that everybody has a connection to multiple aspects to ensure their positive well-being. So we would love for people to go to that site. You can sign up to get the weekly wellness email. And you can also just go to our website to access them at times that you would like. And we partner with folks across campus. So we're partnering with the Counseling Center. We're partnering with RecWell. We're partnering with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And so we feel like we provide a diverse listing of tips for folks to tap into.
Well, I really thank you and University of Maryland for taking such a positive spin on the need for wellness and happiness, because we do always tend to focus on the negative. And I really appreciate you guys coming on the show this week with me. And believe it or not, folks, we're out of time. So I appreciate our audience for watching, our guests for sharing their expertise and information. And hopefully these holidays won't be so blue for a lot of us. And the show is going to be on the YouTube channel. So remember to check it out. It's Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow show. Don't forget the last part show. Like us, tag us, comment, let us know how we're doing. I'm Mariana Cordier, and have a good night.